There are various laws or bills that are in Parliament at this point in time. So 4 of them are quite relevant to the agricultural sector. The first one that I'd like to talk about is the Preservation and Development of Agricultural Land Bill. Now, this is a piece of legislation that is actually long overdue. Our current legislation that protects agricultural land dates from the 1970s and the early 1980s. It's the Subdivision of Agricultural Land Act and the Agricultural Resources Act. So those are both very old pieces of legislation. So this bill now aims to protect and preserve agricultural land. We have very little high potential agricultural land, so that specifically is the target of the legislation for agricultural purposes. And it does so in a number of ways, through agricultural development plans, through protected agricultural areas, and through various agricultural schemes that will sort of identify and then protect these agricultural areas with high potential land. So that is the first one that is currently before the Portfolio Committee on Agriculture, and we are foreseeing that they will host public hearings into that legislation pretty soon. Then we have the Agricultural Product Standards Amendment Bill that has already been dealt with by the Portfolio Committee and is now before the Select Committee on Land and Agriculture, and that bill deals with the so-called assignees. So the legislation allows the department to appoint assignees to do certain functions on behalf of the department, and especially inspections of agricultural products. And there have been some problems with that in the past. This bill is trying to rectify that. So it mainly does 2 things. It will ensure that the monies charged by these assignees is done on a cost recovery basis only, which is critically important. And then secondly, it provides for a consultation process where the stakeholders get consulted on the business plan and the budget that will determine the fees that then gets charged for these inspections. So that, like I said, is before the Select Committee, which is in the National Council of Provinces, which is the second House of Parliament. Then we still have the Expropriation Bill before Parliament. It has been there for quite a while now. It's already been approved by the National Assembly. So that is now also before the Select Committee in the National Council of Provinces. And they have asked again for public comments on the bill. In that bill, there are 2 areas of concern. So there are a lot of good things in the bill as well, but the 2 things that we are worried about is the definition of expropriation, because it is quite narrow and that may result in takings that are not compensated for, and then also the provisions that will allow potentially for zero compensation or no rand compensation in certain cases, which is formulated quite broadly, which is also a concern. The Climate Change Bill is also still before Parliament. It has been before the Portfolio Committee for quite a while. There have already been public hearings and also workshops on the bill. That bill aims to assist South Africa in setting a framework for mitigation and adaptation to climate change and for the transition to a carbon-friendly economy. Then there are a couple of bills that are on their way still to Parliament that are either in NEDLAC at this point in time or still with the department. So one of those is the land bills. There's a redistribution bill that is currently being drafted by the Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, Land Reform and Rural Development, which will deal with the way in which redistribution happens. And once again, there are a lot of good things in there. It makes provision for things like beneficiary selection, for area-based planning for land reform, but they're also talking about, once again, bringing in caps or land ceilings, so limiting the amount of land that anybody will be able to hold, and possible restrictions on foreign ownership, and those 2 are a bit concerning. There's a land tenure bill that's in the process of being drafted, the communal land tenure bill, which will allow for the state to divest itself of the properties that it is holding in the old homelands areas. There is an option of getting title for the people who are living there to the areas where their houses are located, but there's still concern about the so-called outer boundaries, who will have authority over that, whether it will be traditional councils or traditional leaders, or who will exercise the authority there. So those two are on their way to Parliament at this point in time. Then there is a Water Infrastructure Agency bill, which is trying to put a state-owned and state-controlled entity in place that will be responsible for funding and administering all the national water infrastructure, doing the maintenance, basically taking over that responsibility completely. Now that process is now in NEDLAC. We'll probably have our first meeting within the next week or two. And once again, positive things and negative things. Our experience in this country with state-owned enterprises, unfortunately, is not very good. So there's a bit of a concern around that. But also we do need to better manage our infrastructure, like our dams and our canals and all of that. And if this agency will be able to do that, that will be a good thing. Then in terms of legislation that is already in place but that will now be implemented and will likely have a big impact also on the agricultural sector, we had an employment equity amendment bill that has now been signed into law by our president. This happened only last week, and that bill allows the Minister of Labour to set sectoral employment equity targets. So that means that for the agricultural sector, the department, the ministers responsible, but the officials will actually be doing it, will be setting targets per job category for employment equity. And we expect the department to any time now gazette their proposed targets for the sector, and then there will be an opportunity probably for 30 days to comment on that.